We thank you for what we've experienced thus far. We thank you for your good grace, your meticulous mercy, your loving kindness. And now, God, we need to hear from you. Move your preacher out of the way. Speak through him to thee, your people. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, for you indeed are my strength and my redeemer. It is in the precious and perfect name of your Son, Jesus, who is the Messiah, and the redeemed of the Lord said, Amen. Amen. What a privilege it is to have been invited to share in such an occasion as this, where we pause and thank God for sending us a pastor and first lady. What a blessing it is. The Pastor's Aid Committee has selected a text and theme that is appropriate and befitting, so I see no need in straying away. So for a few moments, I invite your prayerful consideration to the book of 1 Thessalonians, chapter number 2. While our theme is extracted from the 3rd and 4th verses, for preachment purposes, I'd like to begin our reading at the 1st verse of the 2nd chapter of 1 Thessalonians. You know, brothers and sisters, that our visit to you was not without results. We had previously suffered and been treated outrageously in Philippi, as you know. But with the help of our God, we dared to tell you his gospel in the face of strong opposition. For the appeal we make does not spring from error or impure motives, nor are we trying to trick you. On the contrary, we speak as those approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel. We are not trying to please people, but God, who tests our hearts. For a few moments, I want to talk about a pastor approved by God. A pastor approved by God. This passage, pericope, paragraph, picked up for preaching this particular period in the program, presents the paradoxical and problematic position of Paul in this his letter to the church at Thessalonica. Dejana, it is important to note Paul. He desired Samaya to be with the church. He wanted to be there, Pastor Hayden. But it's in the tail end of the 2nd chapter that we are informed that due to circumstances beyond his control, Evangelist Pruitt. As a matter of fact, the text tells us Satan prevented Paul from being with the church, despite the great desire of the preacher and the people to be together. Paul preacher wanted to be present. He wanted to be with the church. And likewise, the people, they wanted Paul to be there in Thessalonica. He was, after all, their preacher, their pastor. They were fond of him, so naturally they wanted greater access, pastor, to him. But sometimes, I'm just preaching the text, due to circumstances beyond the pastor's control, and sometimes due to conditions beyond the control of the people, the pastor and the congregation, they're separated, you see, for a period of time that's less than ideal. So the question then becomes, what do you do? When the pastor, the authentic pastor, approved by God, is separated from the people of God for a period of time longer than either would prefer, at a distance greater than either likes. I'm just talking about the text. Paul would tell us, as evidenced by his letter to Timothy, that we are to pick up the ladder of responsibility, and we are to stir the kettle of faith. Paul says we are to stir up the gift on the inside of us, for God has not given us the spirit of fear. What has he given us, Tanya? He has given us power, he has given us love, and he has given us soundness of mind. But the reality is that when the pastor, approved by God, is separated from the people of God for a period of time longer than either would prefer, at a distance greater than either likes, little distractions pop up along the way. I'm just talking about the text. I'm just talking about the text. When we should have the ladle of responsibility stirring the kettle of faith, sometimes that ladle of responsibility is placed with a spoon of nonsense that stirs the pot of foolishness. Distractions, distractions. Paul, he was concerned. Yes, Paul, he was the authentic messenger approved by God to deliver the gospel to the people of God, but he was concerned that the people of God would be carried away with the distractions. Paul was concerned that they would become more consumed with church work than with the work of the church. Distractions. You know what I'm talking about. When the news of the business meeting was placed above spreading the gospel message. Distractions. As a matter of fact, First Lady, if I be real honest, I was almost distracted the other day. My wife sent me out to that mall out there. Y'all know the one out on 59. I was tired. Europeans at work had gotten on my last nerve. And I stopped over there on, I think it's New York, at the Chicken Shack. And I First Lady, thought ahead because, you know, I wasn't feeling preacher-y like, you know. I love the Lord. He heard my cry, but sometimes, Shatanya, I just wanted to get my 6-piece fried hard with, you know, with them fries, and then they let that mild sauce drivel over the side and get sopped up by that white bread. I'm just talking about what I'm talking about. I'll be done directly. I didn't want to talk about theology at that moment. Sister, as I was coming out, I almost made it. Then I heard somebody say, "Brother Preacher." Patrice, I turned around. He said, "I don't even know this man." He said, "Man, I heard that y'all got to sell the church." Distractions along the way. Y'all selling the church. See, the problem is, First Lady, he caught the right one on the wrong day. And I said, "Let me tell you something, bro. Them folks that meet on that hill, we are the church. And that little box you see sitting up on top of that hill at 275 South Barnes Road, that's just the facility where the people of God get together. And you, my friend, are just a distraction along the way. As a matter of fact, history tells me in the 50s, 60s, and 70s that there was some folks that thought if we burned down the facility, we'd kill the faith of the people. But the reality is, the church is not the building. So we can neither be bought nor sold. Don't you get tied up with the distractions along the way. Theologically, we can say it like Paul. I've learned to abase and I've learned to abound. I can say it like the hymnologist when he said, I've had some good days and I've had some hills to climb. But all of my good days, as a matter of fact, Reverend Page can say it like this. I know what it's like to have filet mignon over a candlelight dinner in Cancun, but I also know what it's like to be on Big Mama's front porch with about 6 or 7 cousins, a pitcher of Kool-Aid, a pot of pork and beans, and a pack of hot dogs. Don't you be distracted with the ups and downs of life. You just keep going with the message that has been brought by the approved man of this text. It's tailored to teach us the legacy of a pastor approved by God has nothing to do with brick and mortar. Paul didn't write to ask how many square feet they added to the sanctuary. He didn't want to know how many saints could fit in the cathedral. He inquired about the condition of their hearts. Had they been faithful, had they let their light shine, and had they worked hard and lived peacefully. You see, I believe Pastor Wesby smiles on Progressive from Glory. His smile isn't because of the facility. Isn't because of the acoustics, the sound system, the screen. It's because the work of the church has not become overshadowed with church work. I listened to Mayor Irvin yesterday as he went through Pastor Bedford's accomplishments that show the pastor approved by God isn't distracted even when the distraction might be the distance. God's work will still go forward despite the challenges, the obstacles, and the dilemmas. So Reverend Dr. Samuel Dewitt Proctor would suggest that every message ought to ask a relevant question. And here it is, Pastor Bedford. How does the pastor, approved by God, help us to maintain focus during times of difficulty and distraction? Can I show you 3 things, and then I'm sliding to my seat? First of all, the pastor approved by God preaches with expectation. Chapter number 2, verse 1 says, you know, brothers and sisters, that our visit to you was not without results. Expectation. When the pastor authorized by God brings the message approved by God, there ought to be results and positive changes in the lives of the believers. When we look back over our lives and see where God has brought us and what he's done just over the course of the last 5 years, that ought to cause us to live with expectation that God can and he will do something more, something bigger in our lives. Elton, let me turn the corner and do it like this. The story is told of a pastor who had responsibility over three congregations. It was just after slavery, and each of the three churches had a sharecropping type of agreement. The churches sat on land that was owned by white landowners. They were distracted in their faith because of a great drought that hit the land. And there had been no rain in the land for several weeks. So Antoinette, as a result, they were concerned they would not be able to raise a crop sufficient to cover their expenses. And then the end result, Kiana, would be them losing their respective places of worship. And the pastor had been preaching messages, not of what God was going to do, but of what God had already done, in the hopes that looking back would provide the fuel, the impetus for them to push forward with expectation into what God would do. But they were distracted with the thoughts of foreclosure. They were distracted with the thoughts of a looming bankruptcy. They were distracted with thoughts of losing their physical possessions. And the pastor, approved by God, kept preaching on the results they had already seen. And then one week, Shay, he decided to do something different. He decided that rather than preaching on Sunday morning what God had already done, he decided to show up on Saturday afternoon to see what they were doing. He showed up at the first church, and there they were. Aunt Pam, they were out in the field with frustration and fatigue. They were toiling in the land, and he watched them as they were down in the dirt, and they were frustrated, and they were angry, and they didn't know how it was going to work out. And the pastor approached them, and some of the leaders came over, and they said, Pastor, we thank you for those kind and those convincing words, but it ain't looking too good for us. The pastor hung his head in shame, and he walked down the road to the second congregation, and there, Kendra, he saw the same thing. There were some folks out in the field. They were working, and they were plowing, but they were frustrated. They weren't expecting much. And just when he was about to throw in the towel, he rounded the corner, and he went to that next fellowship, and he saw something very strange in that field. Dwayne, he couldn't really see the folks working in the field. All he could see was legs and feet, because the folks were out in the field with umbrellas over their head. And the preacher said, my gosh, are you all that miserable in this sun that you got to hold an umbrella over your head to prevent the sun from getting to you? And one of the leaders said, no, brother pastor, you got this thing wrong, because right before we start working in the field, we began to think about what God had already done for us. We thought about how he made a way out of no way. We thought about how he showed up and helped us get this land. And we thought about our ancestors that walked ahead of us, and it's on their shoulders that we stand. And we thought about all those messages. And so we began to work in the field with expectation. So the umbrellas over our head that you see aren't to block the sun, but it's to protect us when the rain comes. I stopped by Progressive this morning to let you know that you ought to make up in your mind that you will trust him even when we can't trace him. You ought to make up in your mind that he who has begun a good work in us is able to see that thing through. You ought to work with an umbrella over your head. It might look strange. Folks might look at you like you're crazy, but you say, I'm expecting God to do something bigger and better in my life. So I show up every day, not based on the conditions that you see, God, because faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of that which you cannot see. So I'm building my ark in drought times so that I'm prepared when the rain comes. And when the rain comes, I will be a lender and not a borrower. I will be the head and not the tail. I will be above and not beneath. I will live with expectation that my latter days shall be greater. The pastor, approved by God, preaches with expectation, but secondly, he preaches from experience. He preaches with expectation, and he preaches from experience. Here it is in the text, verse number 2. We had previously suffered and been treated outrageously in Philippi, as you know, but with the help of God, we dared to tell you the gospel anyway, in the face of strong opposition. You see, God uses intersecting experiences to bless the body of believers. You may object and say, but I'm still going through something right now. My experience isn't behind me. My experience is sitting up in here with me right now. But God has a way of using intersecting experiences to bless the body of believers. And so I've got to encourage you not to retreat, not to retract, not to recoil, not to rescind the resolution to try no more, to go no further, to dig no deeper, to reach no higher, all because God has use for your experience in the body of Christ. A wife was having a difficult time in her marriage and was ready to call it quits. She was ready to throw in the towel because her husband was cantankerous. He had become difficult to live with, but the reality is she didn't realize it. At work, he had a female supervisor that mistreated him every day. He didn't understand why she was so cruel, and he wanted to quit his job, but he kept it because of the financial stability it allowed him to provide. And so he was very bitter and mean at home. As a result, the wife wanted to leave him. Now, the woman that was his supervisor had a husband that was an alcoholic. And every night he would come home and abuse her mentally and physically. And she thought it was for no discernible reason at all. And when God delivered him from alcoholism, he became a better husband to his wife. And when he became a better husband to his wife, she in turn became a better supervisor at work. And when she became a better supervisor at work, the man that was the employee was treated better. And when he was treated better, he went home and was a better husband. And when he was a better husband, the wife felt fulfilled and she no longer wanted to throw in the towel. But that wife, before her marriage was saved, God had to deliver an alcoholic. And once he delivered an alcoholic, it trickled down and had an effect on an employee. And when it had that effect on that employee, it turned around and had an effect on that husband. And when it had an effect on a husband, it blessed the wife. And when it blessed the wife, it turned around and blessed the children. And then the children were able to go in the classroom and provide leadership. And when they provided leadership in the classroom, it changed the school. And when the school got changed, the district got changed. And when the district got changed, the community got changed. And when the community got changed, the state was changed. And when the state changed, we had a black president in the White House. All I'm trying to let you know is he will use intersecting experience. So don't you be selfish and throw in the towel. You got to keep going because somebody somewhere along the way has to heal from what you're going through. Paul said the trouble, the opposition we felt in Philippi, it didn't stop us. It pushed us to preach harder and with greater conviction. And that's the benefit of having a pastor approved by God. His trouble, his opposition, his mistreatment, all those experiences didn't stop him. They provided the power to push past and preach with conviction and power. In fact, that's somebody else's testimony. I've been through ups, I've been downs, I've had hell on every side, but through it all, I've tried him for myself. And matter of fact, this church is designed wrong. If we design this thing theologically, we would turn these pews around so that we face the back door and the power from the message would push us out the doors so that we can go out and show God what he's done. Pastor approved by God, he preaches first of all with expectation. Secondly, he preaches from experience. And thirdly and finally, and I'm sliding to my seat, he preaches with exclusivity. Let me show it to you. Here it is in the text, verse number 4. He says, on the contrary, we speak as those approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel. Here it is. We are not trying to please people. We are trying to please God exclusively, for it is he who tests our hearts. So then, Sis Bailey, we conclude that the pastor approved by God is not concerned with popularity, but with the condition of his heart. And if we are to follow the example of the pastor approved by God, we will live a life where we are not concerned with what everybody else is doing. We are concerned with and only with our relationship with him. And if I can get this right, then I become empowered to rise above the petty distractions of life. And I can live with power even in difficult times. What propels us, pushes us to live faithfully to God in frustrating times, not looking to impress anyone but God? Let me clue you in on how you do it. You don't look around at what you see, but you look back at what he's done for you. You see, you're trying to impress Negroes. But the reality is, some of you got some friends that have done you wrong, and others of you got some family members that turned their backs on you. Somebody else got some jobs that did you wrong after everything you gave them. They showed you a box and an escort to the back door. Some of you have been mistreated in the classroom and you thought it was unfair. Some of you just gone through life and it's not been fair. But then you realize, because the reality is, can't nobody do me like Jesus. And when you realize that can't nobody do you like the Lord, then you stop trying to please everybody and you look to the somebody who is the only body that helped you when you weren't able-bodied to do for you what you couldn't do for yourself. As I look back over my life and think things through, God's been good to me. And he took those tests and he transformed those tests into a testimony, and I'm sure glad about it. Is there anybody glad that God gave them a testimony? And because you changed my test into a testimony, I've got to live for you, not for them. Okay, is there anybody that realized that can't nobody do me like Jesus? As I look back over my life, I can see how his love has guided me. Even when I've done wrong, he never left me alone. He forgave me. He kept on blessing me. He never stopped. This I recall to my mind when distractions come along the way. That's what gives me hope. Yes, progressive. Yes, we can live with power. And I'm done. We can live with power. We can overcome distraction when we remember what God has done for us in our lives. Don't get spiritual amnesia. Don't get to where you're going and forget who got you there. Because then it becomes easy to overlook the one that got you there. And you know what's strange about it? I'm done. Come on, musicians, I'm done. What becomes strange about it? I ain't got no more gas. I'm out of fuel. There it is. When you realize that it was him that got you there and you're getting the sticky points of life, you realize that I've got everything I need anyhow. So what am I looking for? You don't like me, but the reality is it wasn't you that got me here. And quiet as it's kept, and truth be told, it wasn't even me that got me here. I wasn't qualified to be here. I didn't have the credit. I didn't have the credentials. I didn't have the qualifications. But God has smiled on me. And because he smiled on me, I will serve him all the days of my life. The doors to my Father's house are open.
At this time, I'd like to bring forth Pastor Bifford to have words to extend the altar call and benediction.
You may be seated. Let the church say amen. Amen. Trying to guard my voice so I won't say a whole lot. It has been a wonderful journey these last 5 years. And I was sitting there and just thinking about how the Lord has brought our church in 5 years. I never will forget, after finding out the fiscal position of our church, I kind of said, now, Lord, what in the world have you gotten me into now? And literally saying, I think I may turn in my resignation and maybe I can go back to third before they call somebody else. And the Lord has been good. It's interesting how when you look back over history and life that the Lord just keeps putting the right people around you. I said yesterday that Reverend Hazelwood was the first one who told me I was going to preach. He and my daddy were very good friends, and here it is, many years later, he calls me his pastor. That's interesting. You heard from Reverend Page today. Amen. As I was sitting there listening to Reverend Page, it's interesting to know that his mother and I went to high school together. And that Reverend Page came out of my family's home church in Phoenix, Illinois, New Covenant. It's interesting how the Lord kind of keeps moving and how the Lord makes a way out of no way. It's interesting that a little more than a year ago, we were worried about Big Mama. We got the news from the doctor, and to look over there and see her with us today. The Lord is good. One night we were driving here, and we got to the hotel over in Naperville, and we got ready to check in, and the lady said to me, your card has been declined. I had checks from the church in my wallet, but I couldn't cash them, and my card was declined. And so here we were, 10 o'clock at night, wondering what in the world are we going to do? And we called Letty's aunt, Aunt Jessie. Aunt Jessie, would you stand? Amen. Amen. And Eugene, would you stand? Now, what they didn't know is not only did we not have money for that night, we didn't have money for the other 2 nights either. And she looked at us and said, as long as you're here, you have a roof over your head. Isn't it odd that even when it seems like it's tough, that the Lord can make a way out of nowhere? The Lord. Driving from Ohio with nothing in your pocket, get there, no room to stay. But we're talking about the Lord, aren't we? And so then I became convinced that maybe this is the place where you want me to be, Lord. Things have happened, and we all looking like we all that in a bag of chips. But at the end of the day, us was broke. And we done called us a preacher from Ohio and all impressive, and us broke. And we're fitting around wondering how we gonna make it. But did I tell you about the Lord? Yeah, all right. At the Lord shows up and shows out. Now this last couple, I want them to stand. They're very quiet people, but I want them to stand. Jerome and Pat Williams, would you stand? Now, there's a lot of folk that's been a blessing to us along the way, but while I was collecting some of these checks that I couldn't cash and showing up at the Marriott and they saying your card was declined, they came up to me after church one day and I said, look here, Reverend, we got a game room there. You can, whenever you need a place to stay, you come on over. And don't ask no questions. Here's a key, don't worry about it. And I said to them the other day, I said, Brother and Sister Williams, do you not realize if it hadn't been not for your kindness, I would have had to resign as pastor of this church. But I tell you about the Lord. And the Lord has always, all along this journey, has opened doors for us. Did I tell you that 5 years ago when we showed up here, that went down Old Second Bank and looked at the numbers and we were $300,000 upside down. That was in July of 2013. Did I tell you on the way home, I said, now Lord, what in the world have you got me into? And can I just pull along on the Indiana Turnpike and protest for a little while? But did I tell you in February when we went back down to Old Second Bank and they told us that not only did we have $250,000 worth of equity in this place 5 years later, that we currently have an offer on the table that would give our church almost $800,000 in cash if we sold. It is the grace of God. And I look back over the journey and throughout the tenure, I have to be honest, there are days in which I said, Lord, am I even in the right place? And 5 years later, this morning when I got up and I said my prayers, and the Lord said, you are where I want you to be for such a time as this. And so if nothing else, as in any pastor during your tenure, you have those that like you. You have those that put up with you. You have those that can't stand you. But in the midst of it all, I am happy to be your pastor. And thank you so much for what God has done in these past 5 years. First Lady and I say thank you. And God bless you. Let us stand.
If our hearts and minds are clear, let us go to God in prayer. Father, we thank you for this worship experience. We thank you for your word. We thank you for your presence. We thank you for your power. We thank you for your pastor that you've sent to us. Oh God, if it had not been for you on our side, we wonder where would we be. But God, we thank you for smiling on us. Now, Father, as we leave this place, we pray that we make it to our destination safely. We find things at least in the order in which we left them, and that you continue to be with us until we're blessed to meet again. Now unto him who is able to keep you from falling and to present you before his presence with exceeding joy. To God who alone is wise be all glory, majesty, dominion, and power, both now and forevermore. And the church said, amen. Amen. God bless you. Go in peace.